Dr. Randall, the Soul Doctor, author of Soul Doctoring, Heal Yourself, Heal the Planet, shares her 40 years of experience as a cross-cultural practitioner, medical futurist, and expert in 20 different modalities of healing, along with amazing interviews with some of the leading minds in medicine and big thinkers in all walks of life. The stories of our lives are the woven energies of our soul's paths. They feed and ignite the spiritual light that nourishes the universal soul, the one mind, the cosmic consciousness where we all come together. This podcast is going to be a deep dive into the personal stories of people who have made significant contributions to the planet. What formed them? What moved them to become these leaders and innovators that inspire us so? Okay, I want to welcome Emeran Meyer, who is my good friend, although we've reunited recently, has been my role model for decades, actually. I worked with him at UCLA. He's amazing. I left UCLA to kind of fight it out for integrative medicine on the front lines, and he stayed and did it academically and then brought forward things that very crucial things he's brought forward and researched and done. I'm so proud of him and so happy to know him. He's a distinguished professor of medicine from UCLA, and that's not easy to get, by the way. He's director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology for Stress and Resilience, and he is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Mind-Gut Connection. I think he also runs a center for the microbiome at UCLA. So that's huge. I'm so happy to have you, and thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to, as you said, not only being reunited and having reestablished our long-term contacts, but also to be on the show and
well, you're the perfect person, because this show is really all about having game changers, people that have made a mark, people that have made a difference and are making a difference on the planet. And I believe you are definitely one of those, and I'm just like thrilled. So let's start from the beginning, Emeran. Where are you from originally? I mean, I know, but let the audience know where you're from originally.
So I was born in a small town, born and grown up in a small town in the Bavarian Alps, somewhere between Munich and Salzburg, which is a beautiful area. Very few people ever leave that area because they're so attached to it. And I've also, I've grown up in a family, several generations of chocolate makers and makers of delicious sweets. So kind of interesting. We'll come to that, how my trajectory has changed from the high sugar consumption and indulgence to what I'm doing now and what I'm proposing now. But both of these things have had a very strong influence on me, and I'm still surprised that I am where I am now, and having left all this behind.
So what made you leave chocolate? I mean, what brought you out of Germany? How long did you stay there? Did you go to school there?
Yeah, so I went to high school, college, and medical school in Munich. Lived in Munich for 10 years, and then there was some unrest inside of me, and I think I probably traced it down. I was an AFS foreign exchange student in 1968, actually in one of the suburbs of Los Angeles. So very tumultuous time, and a lot of encounters in 68 and a lot of experiences that look back now was pretty this has had a profound influence on my thinking, my development, my interactions with
what was
other
going
people.
on there?
Well, there was the Democratic Convention and the whole Vietnam War. I was matched to stay in a family that they thought was a good match, but it was kind of the opposite from my belief systems. Very conservative family, which for me was in retrospect a good thing. So I learned to. I had pretty liberal, I would even say, from an American standpoint, almost socialist views at the time. So there was a big movement in student movement in Germany that affected high school students and university students. It was sort of a reckoning with the German past, really. And even in medical school, we established this socialist council that ran the medical school. I mean, it's hard to believe that today. In retrospect, it was a very important time for Germany because we essentially rejected the world of our fathers. I mean, that's essentially what it was. And but that year away in a totally different environment sort of planted this seed in me that kept growing later. I was not content to be in Munich and in Germany. I went to Switzerland for a year, university, and then I had the opportunity to take a residency position in Vancouver, Canada, even though I had a university position at this time. So nobody could understand why I was doing that. And and then even though I loved Vancouver, again, there was something inside of me, some restlessness, that there was an opportunity to join a faculty member who became a very, well-known, established faculty member in both at UCLA and later at UCSF. Harley DeBass was his name. And he convinced me to move with him from Vancouver to Los Angeles. And in retrospect, I left a girlfriend behind. I left another job opportunity behind, but there was something inside of me that, was pulling me into a place that I would say, of all the places that, that I've lived in up to then, was definitely not the most attractive. It was, and I did this, I think, mainly because there was some kind of searching for a career in something that, that I couldn't find in these other places. But it was painful. When I go back now, and I often tell these stories to our son, and so in retrospect, it's history, but it was a very painful period. I should also say, even during medical school in Munich, so we had these long semester breaks, and every semester break I came to the US and Canada and did externships at McGill and at Harvard and at UCSF. And that made it even worse because I was no longer happy with the way medicine in Germany was practiced and taught. So a lot of things that, I don't know if I should blame it on this 1 year as an exchange student. It probably started earlier, and I think it affected. I would say it has to do something with this post-war generation in Germany that somehow, and I still do today. You grapple with the past, with. It's kind of hard to understand for other people that are not. So a lot of my colleagues always say, but that's so long ago, you had nothing to do with it. I said, no, it's really, it still affects me. And I think I've probably, in some way or another, wanted to start my own thing away from that history.
Sometimes it's the painful things that shape us the most. It's interesting, whether we develop, new interests or go somewhere to get away from it or whatever it is, but pain makes us grow, doesn't it? So that's
absolutely,
that's very cool. Now I knew you to be a very spiritual man when we were at UCLA and did some of that groundbreaking work and had the different types of healers see our patients in the GI clinics. And I knew you to be involved with the Native Americans in some way. How did that come about?
Yeah, so this is something I've never really figured out. My keen interest always, going even back to college in a holistic view of things. And that certainly affected then ultimately my choice to, pursue this, my medical pathway. There were several influences again. So one was that, so during college, I had the opportunity. There was a businessman in my hometown who retired, had a lot of money, and his hobby was to do these expeditions to faraway places. And the first one we went with him together with two of my colleagues, friends, was to the Yanomami natives on the Orinoco River in Venezuela and Brazil. And so we spent 2 months there living with these people, and which also was a mind-opening experience to see something like this. It seemed like we were traveling to a place on Mars and found a new species of humans who completely had a different way of living, and all the rituals, and so there was. And then we did the same thing. I did the same thing twice again. Once with the Asmat people in Irian Jaya, in this part of New Guinea. So by the time that I decided to go into medical school, my head was already full with a lot of experiences, and they seemed to be partially unrelated. There was this adventure filmmaker fascinated with these tribes and what they did, the medicine men and the shamans, and on the other thing was this sort of this history, this typical German history, and so then what happened in medical school? I only went to medical school. I knew this from the beginning. I wanted to do something that is holistic. That at the time, today everybody uses this word, but at the time in a German medical school, this was something completely, non-existent. And so I've went on this. So in Germany, you have this this option to do a thesis, a dissertation. It's not officially a PhD, but I spent 4 years then doing this. So you work in a theoretical institute. And before deciding where we're going to do it, I went to all these professors to find a, head of my dissertation committee. And I went to a guy nearby at one of the Max Planck Institutes who was into the circadian rhythms. We went to another guy who worked with chimpanzees on their emotional, and ultimately I ended up with a lab that looked at the stress response and how the stress response affects cardiovascular blood flow and regional blood flow distribution in the heart. At the time, this was done on dogs. So I still feel bad today, having had this period. So I could never imagine even, how I was able to do this. Not that these dogs suffered, but obviously, ultimately, they did not, survive. And so this was what was kind of the framework that I saw, this brain-body connection. And I realized there is actually a way to study this scientifically, even though all these professors I talked to in medical school said, so it's Dr. Meyer, we all know there's a role of the psyche in chronic disease, but this cannot be studied scientifically. So I proved them wrong. I did this for 4 years. And then, came these externships in the US, and particularly the one at the Mass General at Harvard, that convinced me that cardiology is really not my thing. At the time, cardiology was basically cardiac catheterization and bypass surgery from 7 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. And I said, I just can't do that. It's just not. And then the experience with gastroenterology, with GI patients, was very different. They all had their psychological dimensions, emotional dimensions. And so I came back, told my thesis supervisor, I changed my mind. I'm going to go into GI, which he said, you're going to make the biggest mistake in your career. So anyway, this is how it happened.
You must feel a sense of great satisfaction that you kind of knew the truth and you went after it, and you were told it wasn't going to work, but you showed how it really does exist.
Yeah, and this is this amazing thing when I look back. At the time it seemed like this. I mean, I didn't know why I made some of these decisions, but it had such a strength that I could not have done it differently.
Isn't it? Not. Yeah.
It's the passion, and there's also, I would say, overall, there's some need for looking at the world and my place in it as a whole. I mean, that is. And again, I don't know, you could speculate this have to do with this post-war generation thing, that the whole was broken, for a whole generation. But it's been a very strong and consistent feeling. And then I went through the GI training where our paths crossed. And
where did you do your
was
GI
eager to learn endoscopy. So I left Vancouver after my residency and took a research position at UCLA first, and then from there got into the fellowship. And so I was eager to learn, endoscopy, the technical skills. But once I knew how to do it, I felt, again, this is not it. This was just like in cardiology. I'm not happy with doing coronary
scoping for dollars, right?
Visualization. Yeah, so this was just not. And then in my research, I picked areas at UCLA. They fell into the same area. So now it was not the brain and the heart; it was not the brain and the gut. And I was very lucky to come to UCLA at the time where this sort of took off. I mean, this whole discovery of neuropeptides, neurotransmitters in the gut. And the question was, what do they do there? And then a year later, somebody else in Sweden found the same substances are in the brain. And so then we connected these two things. And so it was a very exciting time, and so this has kind of stayed same way. And then I was encouraged, these were interactions that we had, that I could actually now, as a UCLA junior faculty, I could do things that would have been impossible, like at a German university hospitals, to invite, a Native American, shouldn't call him healer, but somebody with a lot of understanding of PTSD and brain body interactions. Also a Japanese master. So this was, and then we organized a conference at UCLA, and then we organized another conference in Sedona. Brought the leading neuroscientists together with Buddhist monks and Ayurvedic practitioners. So this was like, today, this would not be a special thing, but I mean, this was basically 30 years ago.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And it wasn't done. And it was great. And I stayed with this. I said, okay, so I have the reputation. I stand with both feet in the scientific world. I'm accepted. I had an NIH grant. But now I can dare out and bring in these other pieces that have always been in the back of my mind. And I've kind of pursued this. So you've made a more radical transition, I would say. You've left the science behind and got into
I never
something
leave
that
the science behind.
No, but I mean the active. So you're not a practicing scientist, but so I, for some reason, I was able to maintain and grow my NIH funding grants. They were actually much less innovative than my other thinking, in terms of holistic healing and it's still today. So I still today have, grants on several areas of. Now it's brain-gut microbiome interaction. So somehow my research started with the irritable bowel syndrome because that's sort of a brain-gut disorder, was the only one accepted as such at the time. But now, with the concept of the brain-gut microbiome axis, I've quickly realized this is not just IBS. I mean, this applies to a lot of other disorders. And then, in my last book, I actually carry this further and make this postulate that this brain-gut microbiome immune interaction is the core system within our body that maintains homeostasis, connects us to the outside world, and I think from what I've seen so far, it's phenomenal. Not that far off. It's not. So I didn't get to this because I'm a gastroenterologist. So people always say, "Oh, yeah, you say this because that's your specialty," but that's really not the case. When you look objectively, this communication within this axis or this system, and how it connects us, not just to the microbes inside of us, but indirectly to the microbes in the soil and the plant health. So we're anchored with that brain-gut microbiome system on the planet, just like the plants are anchored with their roots in the soil.
So it's so fascinating because to listen to you, because a lot of your journey, I don't even know if you knew, but my journey sort of paralleled that. I went into the Amazon rainforest and went to the old growth forest with the natives and studied with Native Americans it wasn't a fellowship like yours, but we were allowed to do it, so 4 years and I'd go back and forth to there and, so a lot of similar things, but I understand you attended or in some way participated in Sundance. Is that true?
Yeah, so that was a really interesting connection through a friend of mine, a filmmaker in Vancouver, who actually knew a person that both of us know, a Native American. And so Peter Van Puttkamer was the person. He had, he made documentary films about Native indigenous people around the world, and he somehow knew, George, and introduced me to him. And I forgot the details. For some reason, I got invited to participate in one of these Sundances in Oregon, at the base of Mount Hood. And driving there, I had no idea what this was going to be, what kind of experience this was going to be. And for several reasons. One is, it really made you feel like you're the outsider. You're the white person. It's not your thing. You have a privilege to participate in this and observe it. You can't record it. You can't document it. You can't take it away. You just have to leave. But then, being in the middle of this, a city of teepees and open fire the whole night and the drumming, for days. It was just such an archaic experience. It's hard to describe this to anybody.
Whether you're white or not.
It never leaves you. I mean, this whole, you can interpret this in different ways. And I think the Native Americans obviously have their own, but this whole connectedness to the soil and to the basic elements, I couldn't, think of a way that would be more impressive than that experience. And then also, I mean, like at the same time, you get to understand, this whole sun dancing and then tearing away from this pole, the pain that goes into this. It was just, and I think I went back a second time, I wouldn't want to give up this, this on a similar level as being with the Yanomamis on the Noko. They were just primal experiences with a form of life that we have completely lost, that
put you back in touch with nature and the earth and, all the animals and plants and things.
It almost puts you back like thousands of years, where to a point where all this was connected. And now we live in this fragmented world where everything is split up and digitized, and it's not this. I mean, there's no, like with the Sundance, there's sort of a. I forgot exactly what this. So that involves the transmission of a blood sample from one to another. Which nowadays would be unthinkable to do something like this, but it showed you how basic people thought about it. You're connected at the blood level. So So I mean, talking to you about this, I don't do this too often. I do it sometimes with our son, who you always can't believe. I mean, I can't talk to this to other medical colleagues because the way, as you know, the way a medical career is today, you could never do any of these things today. There would not be time. You're constantly driven by exams and entrance exams, and if you miss somewhere a month, it looks suspicious in your CV. People will ask you in an interview, "What have you done? Did you interrupt your career?" And so when I think about it, I mean, how many things I got to do during this growth period, so tremendously thankful and I'm really glad to be able to transmit that to you in this conversation. It's not that many people know it.
Yeah, beautiful. They're going to. So, what do you think moved you the most? Was it your experiences with the indigenous peoples, or was it just some inner drive? Like, the original founder of Greenpeace, somebody asked him, so how can you ram those fishing boats? And then he said, well, like, how can I not? Or if you ask Picasso, why did you paint that blue lady? He'd say, I have to. How was it for you?
Yeah, it was somewhat like this when I think back. I mean, there was so many temptations not to pursue this path. Girlfriends along the way in Germany, I left them behind. In Vancouver, I left them behind. But also very comfortable living situations. Again, Munich, Vancouver, beautiful, Zurich, beautiful places, and every time, and not even to talk about my own family, I mean, that was sort of a major thing to leave them behind. So there was something inside of me that was stronger than all of this. I mean, I just had to do it. And what I should mention, I mean, there was some help along the way. Believe it or not, this may sound, kind of ridiculous. It's almost like there were these muses along the way. So there were several female figures along the way that played a major role in reinforcing these decisions. And they came sort of out of nowhere, really. I would say there was an older woman who visited her from Vancouver, who visited her mother in a nursing home in my hometown. And so one evening, my dad came home said, "Oh, I met this wonderful lady in a restaurant in town, and she's from Vancouver, and she would love to meet with you." And so then I met this woman, a very inspiring woman, and she essentially convinced me that I should leave everything behind and should take this job in Vancouver. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, the way she talked and the way, and I mean, she has passed away since then, but definitely had a major role. Another woman was somebody like traveling in South America down they call the Gringo Trail on buses and hitchhiking and trucks. And so we did with a friend of mine the Machu Picchu Trail for 2 weeks, and then afterwards we separated, and I took a boat that crossed the Lake Titicaca, left in the evening this boat, and it was sort of a fancy boat from the Old English, so an ancient boat really. And we all got on the boat. It got dark. There was a big dining room on this boat, and I was sitting across 2 women from Seattle, and we started a conversation, and one of them just absolutely fascinated me. I could not think of anything else, and oh my God, I can't believe this. I mean, I just come from this 2 hike, all sweaty still, then I run into something like that. And so then, we still spent some time in Bolivia together. And then she went to Rio de Janeiro to stay with a friend. And I decided to go down to Chile to climb this Mount Aconcagua. And she never got out of my head. So by the time I got back to Germany a couple of months later, we stayed in touch, writing, and she sent me these amazing letters. She stayed with a friend in Rio. She sent me these amazing letters, how beautiful it is, and she's doing yoga on the beach, and it was just like, and I was sitting in rainy, cold Germany, and at some point I just said, I have to do the same thing what she did. I'm gonna go to this woman in Rio, and which I did with 2 friends. We made a documentary film about called the Carioca, which is, the name for the people that live in Rio. And, we made this film. And then after this, so this is all way back. I mean, after this, at some point, she came back and visited me in Europe, and we left. And then we lost contact. We didn't maintain contact. And I was so obsessed of finding her again. I mean, believe it or not. So I'm a medical student, who should think about primarily science and studying. I was so obsessed with finding this woman again that so I knew she was in Seattle. So I applied to residencies all up and down the Pacific coast, and in the U.S. And then one day I get this telegram, which gave me 1 week to make a decision. This telegram, I still have it today framed. It said, unexpected residency position opening, need answer within 1 week. And so, I mean, what ultimately pushed me was this woman in a hotel who told me all about Vancouver and finding this other woman again. And so that's when I left everything behind. So 2 things really. I think there was something inside of me that was always searching for something else than what I had. And I would say it's this quest for holistic understanding and, interaction with the world. But then without these women along the way, it may not have happened. It took that energy that pulled me in these directions. So, and it's a topic that I still feel is very close connected to holistic way of thinking, interconnectedness. It's a female energy. It's clearly, the male brain is always linear and find the shortest direct way from point A to B. And the female brain thinks in terms of networks and connections and keeping pieces together. And so I think it was not a coincidence that I followed this pool of female characters along the way, because I think that's something now that I really is a very important part of my book, and also, my thinking.
Are you referring to your new book?
Yeah, and so, the new book is, and it's interesting. So both of us have talked about this. So you've written a book, which in some ways, I haven't totally finished reading it, but in some ways it's based on a very similar philosophy, this interconnectedness between our health and the health of the environment and the planet. And it's that. And at the same time that I finished this book, actually it went on over the last 3 years, we have been working on a documentary film project called The Interconnected Planet. And it goes beyond the book. It's examples in the corporate world, in science, in agriculture, in business, microbiome science, brain science. And we interviewed like 60 people, the leading thinkers in all these, or shakers and movers in these areas. And it's a wonderful piece. And one theme of this is the feminine, because I think that, and then, it's taken 3 years. During that time, I think the role of women and this feminine principle has even gotten stronger, like almost exponentially, with all these female politicians coming to power in parts of the world and cleaning up the mess that their male predecessors left behind. So that part is an essential part of this film as well. So I would say both in the book and in the film. And it's wonderful for me talking to you to link all this together. Maybe it's sort of, what is this called? Historic revisionism, that you sort of make sense to something that happened for totally different reasons, but it gives it a very personal meaning. Like whatever I've done, I can now put it all together, and they fit all into these boxes in this evolving, individuation process. Maybe, to use that term from Jung, individuation is definitely a word that would incorporate
that's just
that.
Beautiful. When can we expect to see that film, or how's that going to come out, or where, or?
So the film has been slowed, because of the COVID-19 shutdown of the commercial streaming services. So I would still hope that it will come out next year. The book will come out in May of next year, and and I would love to sort of promote both of them together at the same time, because it's not the same. Yeah. But they're related.
Yeah, they support each other for sure. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
So does either the film or the book, or why don't you just tell us where do you see, how do you see us addressing the planetary ills that we have, and what factors do you think are most important for us to do that, to go forward?
It's a difficult question. So on the one side, when you see what's unfolding now, everybody's obviously focused on the pandemic, and people have totally forgotten. Not everybody. There's still a lot of discussion going on, but people have sort of put on the back burner the climate crisis, which will obviously create an even bigger problem. There's going to be millions of people affected by this in very negative ways. And, but so the question is, even if you look at the pandemic situation, how difficult it is to convince everybody to be in the same boat, and So now imagine something is climate change, which is even more controversial for a lot of people, for many of the same people, actually, that can't accept the guidelines for the pandemic, to fight the pandemic. Sometimes I'm a pessimist to say, humans just are not able to, and there's too many issues connected to it. We could fix climate change fairly easily in the West, but then to tell this to countries like India, who is, struggling for survival and have enough food on the table from day to day, this is a harder job. And, the West will obviously have to help them in a big way. So sometimes I'm a pessimist and say that this is a lost battle already. We're not meeting any of these timelines that we've set ourselves, or the limits, and it's moving. It's like turning a huge aircraft carrier around. It's so slow that it may be too slow to avoid a collision with an iceberg or something. But then in other times, you see this outpouring of energy from many of the younger generation, and that's really my only hope. I think our generation will not solve it. I mean, we can help transmit the message and I mean, maybe they don't even need us. When you see some of these movements by these environmental movements in Europe, and also these youth movements in the US. I mean, it's a huge potential. I'm being asked that question many times when I give a talk. There was one at this Grinnell College in Iowa. At the end, they asked me, "So, what can we do to avoid this?" And I said, "Well, it's up to you guys, to you students. It's we sort of, our generation messed it up, but you certainly have the potential to do it." So I think changing consciousness. I mean, without that, it's not gonna work. You have to believe, and passionately believe, that it's now. I don't think it's 5 minutes to 12. I think it's about 10 minutes to 12. And if we create the passion amongst people, both some industry leaders. I mean, we interviewed some of these people. I mean, there are some people actually realizing it and doing things. I always mentioned the founder and owner of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who is a leader in this way, to really push for slowing climate change. But he gives the same answer when you talk to him. He said, on the one side, I'm a pessimist and I think it's too late. On the other hand, what I do is based on my optimism. There is a chance that we can turn this around. So I would say, and there has been progress. I mean, there has been, integrative medicine has become respectable. And I think once you believe in integrative medicine, you believe in the paradigm of interconnectedness, not just in the body. So, yeah, I think I see my main role now not in convincing my colleagues who are still primarily interested in doing their endoscopies, and raking in phenomenal salaries. But through my book, I sort of really got excited about this platform now, and I put everything into growing this platform to reach the general public, not just the educated public, but the public in general. Because, big mistake would be for us to say, well, we're just going to convince people in San Francisco and Santa Monica or Malibu, but, the rest of the country is sort of hopeless anyway. I think as sort of in the role of an educator and a catalyst for this paradigm shift, I think we really have to address this to everybody.
I agree. I agree 100%. And, I'm kind of a spokesperson for this. I wish I was on your show because I'm really been teaching people. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your color is. It doesn't matter what your creed is, what your politics are, what country you come from. It doesn't matter anything. We're all human. And if we can agree on that,
Exactly.
and if we can all agree to have a positive intent towards the planet, we can bypass the bureaucracy. We can bypass all of this stuff that bogs us down. And I mean, this has been measured. The energy has been measured. Our thoughts aren't in here. You know that. They're out here. They're projected out. That's been measured.
Yeah.
And during times of like Christmas or the Super Bowl or whatever, the energy, the electromagnetics of the planet, bursts forth. That's collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can tap into that, no matter, we can make a difference. We can. I would plead you to try to not be pessimistic. Of course, be realistic. We have to be realistic. And we are at 10 minutes to 12, and I agree with you. But if you listen to Richard Attenborough's, have you watched it? His conclusion is we can do this. If we come together as a human race, and that's what we have to do. And we all need to really passionately believe that. And the more of us that believe it, the more we'll believe it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen, it's encouraging. I mean, there are, this is why I'm so passionate about this film also, because I think that really shows that some very high level people in the business world, financial world, they're willing to sort of participate in this, making a difference. If you can provide models and evidence that they can build on, I think there has already been a shift in the mindset of a lot of people. They don't say it openly right now because we have this ridiculous political system that you can't say anything without being thrown into one category. This is beyond categories, beyond parties. This is pure survival and human intelligence, and as you say, consciousness. It's not. I think if we all realize that overcoming this current division will be a key, because we can't solve this in this current mindset of that we're living in two realities, really. I mean, this is and the impact will be asymmetric also, which is a shame. So it's going to hit parts of the planet much harder that, people in the West can say, well, it doesn't affect us. Why should I care what happens in Bangladesh and Pakistan? There's too many people in the world anyway. So this is a danger. It's asymmetric. But certainly something like the fires in California, that has hit close to a lot of people. I think if these natural catastrophes grow, I mean, I hate to say this, but this may be the only way to really create this consciousness, to say, okay, so it's finally time to wake up. We cannot deny if thousands of people are being killed, natural disasters, and they will get worse, even in the US and in Europe. So but the danger that I see is it's going to affect these poor countries a lot worse.
But that's what part of cosmic consciousness is about: respecting and honoring all souls of the planet, and not just people, the animals and plants and things. And I think COVID has actually been sort of a gift to that, because it's made us hold still and look and think. And I mean, some people, like you said, they went the other way, but a lot of people, I see them, in introspection, and then that brings them closer to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing about about COVID is, obviously, the worst thing is to blame it on a virus in China or in the bats. This is going to happen again in industrial agriculture. We're just a breeding ground for these things to happen. And it will happen with the deforestation of the Amazon, where we get closer to animals that carry some of these diseases. And but for people to realize that there is a connection between climate change and COVID-19, between the same attitude that we have towards nature, this destructive, non-respectful attitude towards animals and other species. I think this would be a really important lesson for people to learn. This virus didn't just come out of nowhere, and some politician was responsible for its spread. It's the first bill that we're getting for what we're doing to the planet, really interacting with that.
Okay, so what is your hope? What is your greatest hope?
Well, so my greatest hope that we can contribute, or that I can contribute something to reverse the current trajectory on which the planet is on, and preserve the world that we live in for the next generations. I would say, I think we are going to be okay in our lifetime. It's going to get hotter, and some things will, but we're going to be okay. We're not going to deal with, hundreds of millions of refugees and starvation, and the planet burning, worse than it does now. And so anything that I can contribute to that, I think would be tremendously satisfactory to me. And as I said earlier, I've no more an interest in teaching colleagues. Even teaching medical students in purely medical things, I don't have an interest in anymore. The students that work with me, or have worked with me, they come because they've heard about this holistic understanding. And also interesting, most of them are female students. So it's definitely, but the larger, the lay public and influential people, I think that to me is really my main target now. And I think all my activities will be focused on this, like a laser beam, to contribute to this movement as much as I can, and I certainly would looking forward to interacting with you closer, because, both of us have our own platforms and connections. And so linking up with this, I think, is a great
force, great team. I'm with you. Okay. Any words of wisdom you want to leave us with, or anything we didn't get to talk about?
And it starts with diet. So as long as we're obsessed with the benefits of a diet for our own health, or our own body weight or body image, we're pursuing the old paradigm. If we think about, the healthiest diet, there's pretty consensus on that, is a diet that is optimal for our microbial inhabitants of our intestine. And if we just pursue that principle, so then we move on to a largely plant-based diet, which is obviously one of the most important things for the planet. We get rid of unnecessary suffering of farm animals. Which is something that affects me today, maybe more than it has earlier in my life. Just even drinking milk. When you understand what's involved in the production of milk, it's painful to even think about it. So if we just focus on the optimal health of our microbial co-inhabitants of this planet, they're clearly the most widespread life form and biomass on the planet. If we just focus on the benefits of those guys, we'll do the best thing for our own health, for our metabolic health, for our brain health. We do the best thing for the soil health because we're growing healthier food. And ultimately, we're doing the best for the climate. So it seems kind of, a funny recommendation. Focus on the well-being of your microbes and you'll do a lot for this world without having to worry about any of the other specifics. Mm-hmm. It's so easy. So I think that's something, a kind of wisdom that I've come up with writing this book. By the time I had finished it, I say, this is something I didn't know before. It took me a year to go through all the literature and all the details in the science, but now I'm absolutely convinced that that's a good way. That's a good recommendation for people to follow.
As long as they understand what that means and you guide them, because they may not.
Yeah, this is now the thing to convince people of that, because so we can't see our microbes, we can't touch them. It's in some ways it's a very interesting idea when you think about it. There's this partner that lives with us in the world, that has lived in the world for billions of years before us, that has a wisdom that they have accumulated and stored in their 200 million genes. And so I think when you think it this way, then it makes sense if we do something that's concordant with their benefit. That's something good for the planet, That's
what's good for us is good for the planet. What's good for the planet is good for us. But it's got to take care of those guys inside. It's fabulous. I love it. Okay. Well, I'm so grateful for your coming on. We'll have to do this again after your next book.
Yeah, anytime. So it's been really enjoyable for me as well, to reconnect some of the dots that I don't have too much opportunity to do that, being busy, going from one Zoom conference to another. And no, it feels good. It gives you this holistic satisfaction.
Well, thank you for all your work, everything you've done for all of us. I want to thank you for everybody, and I'm sure the benefit will go forward. So we look forward to seeing that film. And what's it called again?
The Interconnected Planet.
Would you like to give us your website and your Instagram or?
Yeah, so everything is on my website, including a newsletter and all the other social media connections. So it's emeranmayer.com. Just my name, emeranmayer.com.
Okay. Thanks, Emeran.
Okay, Gail, thanks for having me on the show and
stay in touch.
A very nice conversation.
We'll talk soon.